disrupt as a reserve power has to be carefully calculated and worked out. And I think the left has to have ways of thinking that through.
So the example you gave of cutting off food supply.
Yeah, that would be one. I mean, there's a strike of workers in the food supply chain would be very difficult. I mean, almost certainly, of course, there would be an instantaneous militarization of it, and the National Guard would come in and move the food. You know, I mean, so you would then you would have to have questions of the sort that are beginning to emerge in Wisconsin. Are the enforcers of the law actually rather antagonistic to the law that they're having to enforce? And that's always been a problem with repressive apparatuses. At what point does the repressive apparatus itself kind of say, oh, I'm not going to do this? So you know, I mean, things like that, and therefore, I'm not saying you would want to actually. I mean, I think that's the last thing you probably want to do is disrupt the food supply. I mean, but what I would want to do is to create power in that network in such a way as to be able to disrupt it if necessary. And you can see some of the ways in which that's done on the internet. If you know what followed the WikiLeaks stuff with the Anonymous and so on, that there are powers and the left has to be prepared to look for those powers. Yeah.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm really glad you got me out of my house. You mentioned Egypt, and lately, you know, I feel this contagion of feeling good. You know, Egypt, and that's how you built human capital. And they certainly got a flow. They certainly moved around.
Yeah.
Now, if that was the first step of many steps, they're going to make some serious changes. And it seems like the only game in town that really had something to it is that they all come out under the sun and the clouds in the real world. They got out of the boardroom. You know, they weren't paralyzed. Something that man that burned himself to death, you know, he created a chain reaction.
Yeah.
You know, and that's change. That was spectacular. I think I never lived, you know, in my life, I don't think I've ever felt so good by seeing something that, you know, was so powerful.
Yeah.
You know, and it was humanity. Human rights. Exactly that. Human rights. You know,
No, it was a very amazing and surprising and wonderful thing in lots of ways. I mean, you know, as it unfolds, of course, it can go in many different directions. So I'm not sure where it's going to go, but certainly it was a very. But these again, what we are. I mean, this is a bit. You know, I liken global politics right now to the weather. You never know whether it's going to freeze tomorrow or it's going to be 60s. You know, I mean, we're in a very unpredictable terrain right now, and you never know what's going to happen next. I mean, this Wisconsin thing, I wouldn't have thought. You know, well, I saw a generalized conflict coming, and I was thinking more of Britain than I was of the United States. But when I wrote that, but on the other hand, here it erupts in Wisconsin. And I think that you know, there is an instability around, and also both a positive sense of discontent, but also some very negative signs. I mean, if we are, as I think is quite on the cards, in for 10 years in this country of declining living standards and increasing insecurity of employment, if that is what we're in for, how will American people react? Will they react collectively and politically? Or will they go in the direction which I actually see rather some bad signs of, that is to start to scapegoat others, to blame somebody else, to say if I'm down, you have to be down? I mean, what the workers in Wisconsin should be saying is not saying pull the public sector workers down to our level, They should be saying, we want to go up to their level. In other words, if it gets into this negative, and all this cussing out of teachers and saying they're lazy, idle, people, and they should be on minimum wage or things like that, you kind of go, where did that come from? I mean, so there's potentially very ugly reactions to this, as well as potentially positive reactions. And our task is to try to make sure the positive reactions prevail over the ugly ones. But there's a lot of ugly ones out there. And again, this is an unpredictable kind of thing. And so far, the reason I think Wisconsin looks so good is it brings out the good side. And I think the Egypt thing also seemed to bring out the good side. But again, there's a dynamic there, and I hope like you do that trajectory keeps going. Well, yes, okay. One more question. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you. I'm sure you're familiar with the position of Kostas Lapavitsas about the Greek crisis. Basically, that Greece should declare bankruptcy and institute capital controls, working control of the banks, etc. I wanted to ask, do you think, when thinking about the European Union, do you think it's possible for sort of the socialist or revolutionary left, which has a much bigger presence in Europe than it does in the US, to organize on an internationalist sort of anti-EU level, or on a reforming the EU level? Because currently it seems to be split. And then building on that, on the question of finance, it seems it's sort of, I mean, you've noted as well the financialization of capitalism over the past 30 years, but it seems that it's something that the left doesn't really discuss or deal with on the scale that would be adequate. So I want to ask, how do you envision, or how do you think about finance, or let's say worker control of finance? Because when we talk about, let's say, changing the capitalist system, obviously finance is a very big part of that. So you said we won't think about factories so much anymore, but given that sort of we do think about how to organize factories, how do we organize banks, let's say on a public level, to make sure that even within, let's say, the state, they benefit?
Well, there is quite a lot of work on that. I mean, you mentioned Lapavitsas, so there's work by Leo Panich and many people, I think, working on the question of financial organization. I agree. I think Greece should and Ireland should go bankrupt. Or the polite way of saying is they should reschedule their debt. But as even Angela Merkel kind of said, the bondholders should take a haircut at some point, But you see, that's the problem with what happened in the New York fiscal crisis, that the bankers got off scot-free, and the people took the hit. The same was true in Mexico. They got off scot-free, and the people took the hit. The thing that I would say to both Greece and Ireland is, you should default. Argentina defaulted. Basically, Argentinians were told that nobody would ever take capital in there again because, blah, blah, blah. But within 2 years, this is the great thing about capital. That's the other great thing about capital, is it desperately needs investment opportunities. And if it says we're never going to invest in Argentina again, it's lost a really big investment opportunity. And within 2 years, they were pouring money into Argentina like crazy. Result was that Argentina didn't feel the crisis in the same way that the rest of the world did, because so they should have just. I mean, I was trying to say to my Greek friends, you've got a choice of either a lot of pain over a year and a half, or a long drawn-out misery for 15 years. Which would you rather have? Well, extract the tooth and get okay, it will be ugly for a little bit, but then so I think they should default, and they're not getting out. I mean, the misery that keeps on being piled on in Greece, it's one low wave after another, after another, after another, and the same is happening to Ireland. And you kind of go, this is no way to solve this kind of problem. The thing that actually I had hoped to see more of, and there were some hints of it, was didn't understand. I mean, there were calls for simultaneous strike across Greece and Spain and Portugal and Ireland and, you know, into France. And there was a day when some action sort of happened. But I think collective action within the European Union is probably a very, very good idea. And I'm sorry that we haven't seen more of it. There is still the tendency to interpret a lot of these things in, you know, nationalist terms, which is, I think, a bit of a barrier, instead of seeing it as a collective kind of issue that could put pressure on the European Union in general. And again, Greece, for example, has been a major market for German export industry. The Germans actually control the airport. They built a lot of the stuff for the Olympic Games. Siemens runs the whole telephone system. So Greece is a kind of, has been colonized by German capital and to some degree run into the ground by German capital all the way through. So to the degree that Greek debt is located in the German and the French banks, by defaulting, you'd put tremendous pressure on those banks, and then the governments of France and Germany would probably have to support the banks. So I think this would be the way to go. But you know, there's all this kind of political game that gets played, and people get sort of caught in that European web, and basically nobody has the guts to do it. Whereas I think that, you know, that's what they should have done early on. And of course there are, I mean, I'm not arguing that the Greeks don't have a lot of problems internally in terms of collecting taxes or this kind of stuff, which then goes back to your other question as to how could banking systems be organized. Well, I mean, I think, you know, various proposals. I mean, Leo Panitch was saying they should be organized as public utilities. And, you know, we do have forms of banking like credit unions and so on, which are less predatory, you would hope anyway, than you know, Chase and all of the other people. So there are alternative forms of providing credit without necessarily going to the sort of the Marx Engels solution, which is centralize all means of credit in the hands of the state, which I don't think is a good idea. But there are decentralized forms of credit institutions that could be set up, and they used to be around before the whole thing, the whole thing got sort of homogenized by the sort of revolution in financial systems in the 1970s in particular. I mean, you know, your local savings and loan institution, for example, was quite an institution in many neighborhoods, and was helping stabilize neighborhoods in many instances. So there are several forms which could be experimented with of alternative financial structures.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.